Prospector News is media for educational purposes only and should not be construed as advice. We are not a certified financial analyst, licensed broker, or fund dealer, exempt market dealer, or hold a license to provide financial advice. We provide no legal opinion regarding accounting, tax, or law issues. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or the solicitation to buy or sell stocks or commodities. All opinions expressed are those of the participants and should not be relied upon when making investment decisions. Those decisions should be made with the advice of a personal financial advisor. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please hit the like and share buttons and be sure to hit subscribe. I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector News Podcast. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to have with me as my guest, Dr. Marc Faber, the editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Faber.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and I look forward to this discussion.
Yes, absolutely, as do I. 2022 has been an incredible year so far, and we've got lots of gloom and doom to talk about. Between the economy, inflation, war, pestilence, take your pick. Where do we start?
Well, anything you want, whatever.
Well, we're recording this on July the 5th. The euro took a negative turn this morning, which propped up the US dollar and caused the stock market and the economy and the commodities markets, which is our world, to take a pretty harsh nosedive. Seems to be more Fed incompetence that we could probably start this conversation off with.
Sure, but I'd just like to mention that asset markets do not move all together, although in 2022, just about everything went down except oil and gas. But today, the market is down, the stock market is down, the gold market is down, and bonds are up strongly. In other words, just as everybody was worried about inflation, the bond market seems to say that maybe some of the fears are overblown, at least for the near future. So it's a market that we have to be very careful because it's very volatile. And you just mentioned gloom and doom. Yes, that is correct. But equally, the market or the markets have become very oversold. And anytime they could rally quite strongly.
What do you think will be the trigger that'll cause a rally?
Usually, there is no trigger why markets go down and why they go up. The trigger is later on explained. It went up because of such and such, and it went down because of such and such. But normally, turning points happen against all expectations. So when things look really bad, frequently markets, at least in the shorter run, bottom out and there can be strong rallies. I remember so many bear markets starting with 1972, 74, where stocks went down very strongly, but in between there were very strong and powerful bear market rallies. And similarly, the oil market after 1980 and the Nikkei after 2000, after 1990. So we have irregular trends. Is like in an uptrend we had since 1982, an uptrend in US stocks, but it was interrupted in 1987 by a sharp decline. And in 1994, 93, 94, 98, and 2000, and 2007, 2008, and then February, March 2020, and then we made a high last year. So but I think we probably reached a peak in asset prices and we'll see a difficult time for maybe a few years.
I see. So rather than laying the blame to the feet of the Fed, you're suggesting that we're just simply experiencing a natural correction of the markets because they've been overbought for a considerable length of time.
Well, the Fed deserves a deeper discussion because the Federal Reserve is a bunch of, let's put it this way. The last Federal Reserve chairman who had some knowledge, some economic knowledge, was Alan Greenspan. I'm not saying that I supported all his policies because he also created bubbles and he was difficult to understand or didn't want to be understood. And he also pursued a political agenda. But the last three Fed chairmen, including Powell, Yellen, and Bernanke, are totally ignorant, incompetent, arrogant individuals that should never be in charge of something as important as a central bank. That I want to make very clear.
Well, I certainly can't disagree with you on that. I liken the current Fed board as like weathermen. You get to be wrong a good chunk of the time and still keep your job, which is astounding to me.
But it's been this way for quite some time. And you see, when Milton Friedman had his 90th birthday, Ben Bernanke gave a speech and he was applauding Milton Friedman for his view that the Fed had actually caused the 1929 to 1932 depression and so forth, because the money supply had gone down at that time. But he didn't mention, or he and Yellen and Powell, who are all basically Milton Friedman admirers, but they have a misinterpretation of what Friedman said. Friedman actually had a very low opinion of the Federal Reserve that he never mentioned, and thought that the computer could do the job better than the Federal Reserve, and that the Federal Reserve should not interfere in the economy with monetary policies, and certainly not finance large deficits, because he clearly explained. And your listeners, you can all go, and I recommend this, you should go to Milton Friedman's speeches in the 1970s. These speeches usually last sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes half an hour. But Friedman, he speaks with great clarity of the problems of economic interventions and government interventions into the economy, that usually the interventions make things much worse than they would otherwise have been without interventions. So he's actually totally opposed to the policies that were followed. And it would have been obvious to him, as it is to many other people, that when you created this fiscal deficit to combat COVID, which was probably also a government intervention, in my opinion. But anyway, the reaction
I would
to
recommend
it was
that our listeners look those talks up on YouTube. I had the pleasure of hearing Milton Friedman speak when I was a university student in the 1980s, and I'll tell you, it was life-changing.
Yes, he's a very brilliant person, but he's been misinterpreted, like many historical figures have been misinterpreted for a political purpose. But the point I want to make is the interventions that the Fed undertook created after the COVID crisis in February, March 2020, it created an economic boom, but not a real boom. It was kind of a surreal boom of spending and of speculation. That they managed to do very well, to trigger a huge speculative boom in meme stocks, in cryptocurrencies, in SPACs, in all kinds of assets. And after that, the money supply started to come off. And as you know, since the summer of 2020, now 2 years, the bond market became very weak. In other words, the market anticipated that interest rates would go up, and they anticipated that inflation would accelerate. But the idiots that sit in central banks around the world, they maintain, oh, these inflationary pressures starting 2 years ago are transitory. And the ECB under Mrs. Lagarde, who should be in jail anyway, but the French, legal system is a bit different than what the legal system should be. But anyway, she is the president of the ECB. Until just a few months ago, she was talking about the transitory nature of inflation and still had negative interest rates. Negative interest rates. At least the Fed never introduced negative interest rates, although it was, of course, proposed by some professors at Harvard.
I took a lot of economics courses in university, and if I ever had even suggested negative interest rates, I would have got a big giant red F and a suggestion by the professors that I should seek another passion in life.
Well, it's nothing new, these negative interest rates. There was a German economist, Gesell. He lived in Switzerland and he became a Swiss. Silvio Gesell. I have his first edition. He lived around 1910, 1920. But his argument for negative interest rates were not from a monetary point of view, but from a fiscal point of view. He thought that the way to tax wealth is to introduce a tax on rich people who have deposits that would penalize them for having deposits. So he proposed negative interest rates on deposits, but it was not to conduct monetary policy.
No, it was to penalize people, and yet we have monetary policy that essentially does exactly that. It penalizes people. The challenge I've always had with the Fed is it always seems to be looking after Wall Street rather than Main Street. And let me give you an example. I was just reading an email missive from a friend of mine who lives in a small BC community. And he was lamenting that some of his favorite small businesses in the last few months have all closed up shop and gone broke because they couldn't make it through after the pandemic. And the pandemic funds that the government had, given them had dried up, and people still weren't going back to the businesses the same way. Yet there's huge inflation, and the Fed says that the economy is booming, and we see this kind of disconnect, and I just kind of wonder.
Well, I think a lot of people wonder. In fact, I'm not wondering, but I'm convinced that the policies that some people, and I don't know whether it's Biden, because I can't imagine that he is really running the US government. I also don't think that Obama was running the government. The people behind that guide these puppets. And so these people behind, in my view, they have pursued a policy of eliminating small independent businesses while favoring large groups, like, say, if you look who benefits the most from lockdowns, these are companies like Amazon and Facebook and so forth. So these groups were favored. Or I see it in Thailand, the small shops had to close down, but 7-Eleven could keep their shops open.
Yeah, I saw similar things
when you
here in
see this,
Canada. Made no sense.
when you see this, then you ask yourself, well, is this really a coincidence or isn't that a plan? And then you go and look at the World Economic Forum and their programs, and people like Harari, who is like #2 at the WEF, with the disciples like Trudeau and Morrison in Australia and Macron in France and so forth and so on, all these clowns. And then you realize maybe these people, their desire is to actually eliminate small businessmen, independent businessmen, and essentially create a class of the rulers, like Machiavelli's prince, the ruler. You create a class of rulers in each country. They coordinate their policies, and one day they ask you to lock down your shop. The next day they will ask you to surrender your wealth or your house or whatnot. So I think it's a trend that is actually quite worrisome.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm not a big fan of cryptocurrencies. And the reason for it is I believe that they're the slippery slope for the government telling you what you can and can't spend your money on.
That is correct. But I'm also concerned that one day these really low-class government officials, I mean, if you look at the intelligence of Trudeau, I mean, it's really something to worry about. And that these people one day will say, well, you know, you own gold. I don't think private citizens should own gold. We're going to take it away from you. They can do that. Or they can do a Cyprus. They can do a Cyprus trick. In Cyprus, one day, the banks closed their doors. They said, depositors with less than $100,000 will keep their accounts. Everything above $100,000 will take it away.
Yeah, no, it's not right. Now, in Canada, I know you live in Thailand. Did any of the news of our trucker convoy protests make its way over to Thailand for you?
It's made its way around the world, and everybody's reaction was essentially this. Here we have the US government going around the world and telling us about freedom, about democracy, about the protection of liberty and of property rights and so forth and so on. And here we have a democratically elected government that essentially treats the peaceful, I have to say, peaceful protesters like criminals, whereas the US government at the same time treats the BLM, the Black Lives Matter destroyers of property and thieves and looters as heroes. That is something to worry about.
Well, I'm personally worried about the protection of free speech, period. What really concerned me with the truckers' protests is that first off, they basically trotted out the War Measures Act, which was heavy-handed and unnecessary. But the fallout from this is I speak to a lot of Americans who believe that the people that participated in the protest had their bank accounts seized. because Trudeau mused about doing that. He never actually seized anybody's bank accounts, but the mere ability to muse about it and send that kind of a fear through society is, it's bone chilling.
Well, actually, I read some articles where some people got their accounts frozen, but not for a long time.
The only thing that got froze, to my knowledge, was that there was like GoFundMe pages. The funds that were placed in the GoFundMe pages, those got frozen, and they were held not to be distributed. And then eventually they were returned to the people that made the original donations, but they were held in limbo for a time. And I think what's happened is that got conflated to people's bank accounts, and in reality, it wasn't their accounts. It was just that. But as I say, the fact that he even mused about it was just chilling. That the government, if they don't like your opinion, can basically shut down your ability to, pay for something simple as food.
Understand. But you see, because I studied economics, and I have a PhD in economics, although when I finished my studies, I didn't know much, but later on I learned more. But increasingly, I came to the conclusion in the last 2 years that it's very important, if you want to have a free economic system, that you also study the political philosophy. And so I started to look into political philosophy, and then I came to the American Constitution, and I read and listened to numerous speeches of constitutional experts, what the Constitution is really about, and so forth. And then I got channeled to impeachment hearing of Mr. Trump in December 2019. And then at that hearing, at the first hearing that would lead eventually to the impeachment, they had 4 legal experts, 3. One was from Harvard, 1 from Stanford, and 1 from North Carolina. And they all said there are grounds to impeach Mr. Trump based on this and that and so forth. But anyway, I thought these opening statements were very interesting because, in my view, there would be ground to impeach Mr. Trudeau. I don't think that in the Canadian Constitution it is permitted to essentially undermine freedom of speech and expression and the right to protest the way he did it.
No, I don't disagree.
I think that Trudeau should be impeached.
Yeah, we don't have a mechanism.
I don't understand that Canadians,
we unfortunately the only way to get rid of him is at the polls, and touch wood, we'll get an opportunity sooner than later.
But he was re-elected. That I will never understand. That Canadians, I always had a high opinion of Canadians. I always said, whenever I travel from the US to Canada, I feel like going from hell to heaven. But after what I've seen, I'm really worried.
Well, sometimes it's like this, Mark. I fly a lot and I use Air Canada. That's because it's convenient, not beyond anything else. And they always win these awards. And flying on Air Canada is a horrible, horrible experience. And I kind of wonder how bad all the other airlines are if Air Canada is winning the awards. And in Canada, unfortunately, the fact that Trudeau won was a byproduct of how worse the other potential leaders were. So hopefully we'll have somebody new step up in the Conservative Party, and we'll get some real leadership. Right now, Trudeau's like the the lesser of the idiots.
It's hard to believe that they're greater idiots than he is.
I don't disagree, but I often likened it back to the 2016 US election where they had a choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And I couldn't believe in a country of 350 million people that those are the two best choices they had to be president. It boggles the mind. And I read somewhere from somebody, and I can't remember where the quote came from, but they said that there are times where you have to go through these periods of poor leadership for a real leader to get fed up and step up. So I'm awaiting for whomever that new, that real leader is to come and step up and, maybe fix some of the problems that's been created. We've got to stop electing idiots. That's all I have to say.
Well, that I agree. Anyway, do you want to talk about some investments or?
Yeah. So with all that we've talked about, where should people be looking to? What sectors are going to come out of this earlier than others, and where should they be looking to for opportunities when the boom after the gloom and the doom are done comes?
Well, this is a good question because if you look at the last, say, 30, 40 years, we have to see that stocks peaked out in the US in, say, 68, 69. They made a marginal new high in January 1973. And they didn't go anywhere until August 1982. In real terms, inflation adjusted stocks were in 82 down 70% from the 1966 level. So in other words, 16 years earlier, in real terms, inflation adjusted. So 1970s was a period of a lousy stock market. You look Japan after December 1989, 1990 to essentially 2003, it was all the way downhill. And so in the world, we can have periods during which asset prices perform poorly, period. And I think we may have reached a turning point from this asset inflation that we experienced, from which asset holders did benefit, and the public got essentially left behind, that this period has come to an end in 2021, and that from here on, asset markets will be unfriendly. In other words, that stocks will not move up, that bonds will not be particularly attractive, although there could be, short-term trading rallies, that commodities are not particularly attractive, and that real estate in Canada is unattractive, and so forth and so on. And that this period could last actually a few years. So this is my base case. Now, there may be opportunities and trading opportunities and opportunities on short side and so forth. But say you have assets of 1 million or 100 million, you have to ask yourself, well, if I have 100 million and in this environment, Mark, you're describing that everything is unattractive, then I only want to lose 10 or 20%, while the majority loses 50%. So then you have a huge outperformance vis-a-vis the rest of the world, which would be very desirable. It's like if everybody's up 50% and you're only up 20%, it is a much worse scenario that you'd be down 20% and everybody else is down 50%. You understand?
Yeah.
We have to measure wealth and assets relative to other people.
So essentially, we're trying to put together a plan where we're going to lose less than our neighbor is.
I think the world in a money printing environment began to believe that you only will make money in assets and that you have to be long assets and that you have to be long speculative assets like cryptos and NFTs and meme stocks and God knows what. And now I believe the world should change their view and say, what is the best for me to do to lose the least given the unfavorable investment environment, and especially given the unpredictability of government officials. You see, if you have a free market, then the market moves. You only have to pay attention to market trends. Now we have to pay attention to what the government will do next. Will Mr. Biden continue his irrational energy policy, or will he turn around? Will the Fed print money, or will they tighten monetary conditions? As Friedrich von Hayek noted, the more the state plans, the more it is difficult for the individual to plan. The more the state intervenes, the more difficult it is for the investor to make investment decisions. That is my interpretation.
So what we need to do is we need to be watching the politics rather than the economy.
You have to watch everything. I started
that's still
to work
good. I'm
in
usually only
1970.
half awake. The eyes in the back of my head are always closed.
No, I started to work in 1970 for an American investment bank in New York. And then in 73, I moved to Hong Kong. But let's say at the time, we just paid attention to interest rates and to the dollar and to stocks. Now you have to pay attention to so many different things.
Yeah, no, it's a much bigger ocean that the economy floats on, that's for sure. So if people want to get a hold of your reports and become a subscriber to the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, I don't want to recommend that, but I have a website, gloomboomdoom.com, all in one word, Gloom, Boom, Doom, and also under my name. You can Google my name. So, but I just like to point out, I have two reports and I don't want to promote them. One is more for individuals and for, let's say, what I consider ordinary people who have money to invest. And one is more for financial institutions and very well-to-do people who are interested, say, in geopolitical issues and in some historical facts and in some philosophical issues and so forth and so on. So the two newsletters that I write, and most of my readers, they stay usually with me for a long time because they like the different approach I have to other people in the marketplace.
Well, I would definitely recommend anybody look that up and become a subscriber. The information
very
and
kind of you.
The historical facts are remarkable and a very good read every time.
Well, thank you very much. Very kind of you.
Thank you.
You should become
Thank
my
you very much for
promotional.
joining me, and I hope we have the opportunity to do this again on a regular, semi-regular basis as the world moves forward, and hopefully we'll have more opportunity for boom rather than the gloom and the doom that's been there this year.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you very much, Michael. Bye-bye.
Thank you.